There's water in the nukes, there's corruption in the government, and all the while China's having its very own recruiting crisis. As always, guys, I want you to comment. I want you to tell me what you think throughout the video. Don't wait till it's over. Don't even pause it. Just let the soothing sound of my voice guide you as you prattle your little fingers on the keyboard and tell me what you think. I want to know what your opinion is. I am Mandatory Fun Day, and today we're going to talk about the problems that China's facing. Now, I think it's important to note that a lot of people, when they're talking about China in reference to the US, for the last 10 years, they're talking about how China is going to overtake the US militarily and economically. And make no mistake, every country in the world is constantly trying to improve its position. Russia and China both want to take the place that the US holds, which is primarily the world's superpower. We hold the world's reserve currency, right? The world's reserve currency is the US dollar. We are the premier military power across the planet. And among other things, it just kind of is good to be in the United States of America. USA, USA, USA. But China is facing its own issues, right? And I think it's important to note these when you're doing any kind of comparison between the US and China, right? So starting off, China has had a years-long campaign trying to root out corruption in the government and in the military. One of the biggest signs of this was all the way back in 2021. I can't believe I can say all the way back in 2021 now because we're in 2024. But one of the biggest signs of this was when intelligence came out, or when pictures came out of Chinese missile silos. Now, China was trying to build missile silos in what was believed to be an effort to compete with the United States and Russia as far as missile launch capabilities. Well, when the pictures came out, it was very clear that the lids of the missile silos couldn't operate, right? They wouldn't operate as intended. And this was a very clear sign of Chinese corruption. These things are being built using government money, so why are they being built so drastically incorrectly? And anybody who's done any time in the government knows that when the government tries to build something, a lot of times you don't get exactly what you thought you were gonna get, okay? Especially when it comes to vastly complex pieces of technology or software or what have you, right? It's tough. The government's a massive organization, and it's just really, really hard to have significant oversight over everything that's done. But these missile silos were built, they weren't operating properly, and that brings me back to very recently when intelligence came out, or indications came out, that there was water in Chinese nuclear weapons, Chinese nuclear missiles. Now, talking to a couple of my buddies that know a little bit more about this stuff than I do, I don't know that it actually was a mistake. Maybe they were intended to be stored with water because they didn't want to store them with fuel, right? There's a lot of misinformation going around. Who knows what's true or what's not, right? But the fact remains that China is trying to root out corruption, and that's seen in the dozen Chinese government officials and military leaders that have been ousted very recently. And this brings me back to what I mentioned before, the Chinese recruiting crisis, okay? Now, don't get me wrong, if we sit on our laurels and we kind of just think we're the greatest thing ever in the US, China would overtake us, but we are constantly trying to improve our position as well. Okay? And it's interesting to me to see some parallels between the United States and China. The United States is currently undergoing its own recruiting crisis. It is very hard to get young people to join the military. The United States Army was short upwards of 15,000 recruits, 13,000, 14,000, somewhere around there. But we were very short pulling people into at least the active duty Army. Now, a lot of people like to talk about retention and how retention is suffering too. All the data that I've seen shows me that retention in the United States military is actually right where they want it to be. Now, of course, they want it to be better because we're not bringing as many new people in, but it is what it is, right? We're doing pretty good as far as retention goes. We're kind of hitting the metrics that we want to hit. For the past several years, or I mean maybe even the last couple decades, China has been attempting to modernize its military, and it's focused significantly on its Air Force and its Navy, okay? And with all this new tech, you need people to man it, you need people to operate it, and you need people with a level of acumen that can do that. Right? In the United States military, we have the ASVAB, right? The Armed Services Vocational and Aptitude Battery. I think that's what it's called. It's been like 34 years since I took it. It's only been 12, okay? It hasn't been that long. But we have a way to determine if somebody can do specific jobs or not. In the Army, at least, I can't speak to the other branches, but in the Army, the General Technical or GT score on the ASVAB kind of determines what you can do. When I came in, if you got a 110 or higher, you could do like pretty much anything in the United States Army, right? Pretty much any job is open to you, but a higher GT score is better. Now, I assume China has something similar, some kind of similar pipeline or testing procedure in order to determine if somebody can do a job or not. And what they're finding is they can't get enough highly skilled individuals into the military to operate all this new equipment. That's pretty significant. And there's, in my opinion, 3 reasons for this. The first reason we've already kind of discussed, it's the corruption. And I think the Chinese public is very much aware that their government is fairly corrupt. Okay? Nepotism runs rampant in the Chinese government and in the Chinese military. And nepotism is basically when somebody has family, usually, in a position, and so they can get a more prominent position in whatever organization that person is in, right? And you see it very often in governments across the world. It's a significant problem. Also, with the way that money is being spent and how results often aren't delivered, right? This is a very normal problem in government anyway, right? There's almost always waste as far as when money gets spent. Okay, but I think the Chinese public is aware that their tax dollars are not necessarily going to exactly what they should be. The second reason kind of bleeds into that corruption aspect, right? But Chinese nationals, specifically Chinese parents, don't want their children going into the military, okay? They don't believe that their children will be taken care of like they could be in the private sector. And there's even public talks about how China struggles to train its own military. This is public knowledge. This is something that the general public in China is aware of, or at least believes. Whether it's true or not, I mean, it's up for debate. I have seen data indicating that upwards of 20% of China's own, like their borders, they struggle to operate within, right? So about 80% of the country they can operate with relative freedom of maneuver, but a decent portion of the country they cannot go easily and then also sustain themselves logistically to conduct training. In addition to this, it is well known that China struggles to conduct joint operations. Joint operations are when we combine the different branches of service and we make them work together with synchronicity. You guys didn't think I knew that word, but I do, okay? Sometimes I'm pretty photosynthesis, if you ask me. This is by far militarily the most difficult thing to do, right? Getting the Air Force to work with the Army, getting the Army to work with the Navy, getting the Marine Corps to work with anybody. And don't even get me started on the Space Force and the Coast Guard, right? We don't even know how we're gonna play these guys in. I do think it's kind of funny. I was working with some Canadians, and the Canadians had worked with the Coast Guard, and they were shocked to find that the American Coast Guard was pretty much as well armed as the Canadian Navy. This was Canadians saying this. I didn't say this. I'm just telling you what the Canadians told me, okay? They also told me that they love Guinness, and that sold me. We were lifelong friends. Right, but parents think that their kids aren't going to get taken care of like they could be in the private sector, and it's not necessarily untrue. Okay, it's known that the Chinese private sector pays better. It has better benefits. And so the Chinese government has rolled out a slew of benefits that individuals serving in the military can have. China does have a primarily volunteer force. I was kind of surprised to find that out. I didn't know that. There is some level of a conscription force if you choose not to voluntarily serve. It's effectively like you don't even need to really factor it in. It's not a significant portion of anybody's life. Finally, the biggest thing driving young people away from the Chinese military is the restrictiveness of military life. Now, U.S. citizens, especially U.S. veterans or people currently serving in the military, we know it's very restrictive. There are certain things that certain states can do that we can't do, okay? And I'm not going to make a comment on those things because I don't want to get in trouble. But you guys know what I'm talking about, right? The military life is restrictive. You can't go outside 250 miles from a military installation. If you want to go to certain countries, you got to get permission. If you want to leave the country at all and the United States military isn't sending you somewhere, you got to get permission. You got to do DTS. probably going to add a trigger warning to that one. But military life is restrictive. That's the nature of it. Accountability is everything because units are never manned at 100%. And so making sure that everybody's there, we got to do it. We got to do it. We are all feeling the low manning. So if you've ever considered joining the United States military, now's the time. All right, but military life is incredibly restrictive. It's even more restrictive in the Chinese military. Right, I was doing a little bit of reading, and you have to serve for 10 years and be an NCO or an officer in order to live with your married spouse in the Chinese military. That is restrictive. That was kind of crazy to me, that cultural difference. That would never fly in the United States military. You'd have people leave. Desertion has been a significant problem as well. Now, I believe that people that leave the military are our greatest spokespeople. And I don't mean that in necessarily a positive way. If somebody has a terrible experience in the United States military, they get out, they're gonna go out and tell other people what their experience was. And somebody who's getting out of the military after just 1 or 2 contracts or maybe even 10 years, they're going to go work in more than likely jobs that have other people within that recruitable population. And they will tell them, okay? Word of mouth is extremely powerful. Look at social media. They'll get on social media and they'll air their grievances about the military. It's very powerful. And those deserters in China are more than likely doing the exact same thing. Okay? When people go out and they are within a recruitable population, they're going to say how they feel. People are going to ask them their opinion. They're going to ask them questions, and they're going to give them their honest opinion or their candid opinion. It's gotten so bad that China has started a media campaign in order to shame the deserters, basically. But as always, I want to know what you guys think. Okay, what do you guys think about what's going on? Are we looking at China overtaking us as a world superpower or the premier world superpower? What do you think about Chinese recruiting issues? What do you think about their ability to modernize their military or ousting their corrupt politicians and military officials? Let me know what you think in the comments.